Imagine you are an emperor, tasked with claiming vast lands on the eastern frontier after a global catastrophe. You hold an army, a navy, censorship, and a monopoly on the creation of history textbooks in your hands. Yet, from the shores of the Pacific Ocean come uncomfortable reports. Maps already name the bay after a foreign queen. Ancient tunnels have been found underground, and instead of wild taiga, there is a scorched desert and the ruins of a port. These ruins prove that a civilization more advanced than your own once existed here, and you have not arrived in an empty place. With just one decree, photographers are banned from capturing panoramas, and the founding date of the city is shifted to a date more convenient for you. What will you choose? To acknowledge that you are merely a marauder on the ashes of another empire, or to create a beautiful legend about pioneers to erase the memory of your predecessors forever? Now let's see how this looked in real history. Open any encyclopedia. Find the article about the founding of Vladivostok. June 20th, 1860. A ceremonial moment. The birth of a city at the very edge of the Russian Empire, an outpost on the shores of the Pacific Ocean. An event of state significance. And now take a look at the illustration of this historical moment. What do you see? A drawing, an artistic drawing, watercolor, not a photograph. It's strange, very strange. Let's think about it. By the year 1860, photography had been around for 20 years. Daguerreotypes appeared in 1839. By the 1850s, photography had become a widespread technology. Warships had photographers on board. Travelers brought bulky cameras with them to capture distant lands. Governments documented important events, coronations, bridge inaugurations, and the laying of temples. The founding of a new city on the Pacific Ocean. Isn't this an event of utmost importance? Wasn't it worth using a photographic plate to capture the moment when the Russian flag is raised over the Golden Horn Bay? But we only have the drawing. A watercolor picture where the artist depicted gentle green shores, trees, a ship at anchor, and a handful of people with a flag. Beautiful, romantic, like an illustration for an adventure novel. You will be told this is an artistic tradition. It is said that it was customary to commission painters to create canvases to immortalize historical moments. A beautiful depiction for future generations, so that it looks impressive in textbooks. Okay, let's assume. Then answer one question. Why does exactly the same design, executed in an identical style, with the same compositional techniques and color palette, exist for the foundation of Sochi? Compare them. The same angle, the same green shores, the same ship at anchor, the same tiny figures of people. Even the position of the flag on the hill is similar. As if one and the same artist in one studio was churning out beautiful legends for different cities, painting from a template things he had never seen with his own eyes. This is not a romanticization of historical events. It is a fabrication of the visual narrative, filling in the gaps where there is either no real evidence or where it was decided not to show it. And now ask yourself the following question. Where are the photographs of Vladivostok from the 60s? Not illustrations of its founding moment, but real pictures of the city that is supposedly being built from scratch. The first buildings, military posts, soldiers, the construction of docks. Anything at all? Open the archives. Browse through the albums. The first photographs of Vladivostok appeared only in the early 1880s, 20 years after its official founding. 20 years of the city's history have simply vanished from the visual record. 2 decades. A void. No documentary evidence of how the settlement grew, how the houses were built, or what the first streets looked like. Why? Perhaps there are photographs, but they are not being shown? Because they reveal things that should not be seen? Buildings that were already there? Infrastructure that, according to the official version, did not yet exist? People who were not supposed to be there? Or are there really no photographs because what happened here in the 60s was entirely different from what is written in the textbooks? Let's think logically. Photographers in Russia in the mid-19th century were not uncommon. Every major city had a photo studio. Military expeditions took photographers along to document their campaigns. Diplomatic missions recorded their visits on glass plates. Vladivostok is a strategically important point. The first Russian port on the Pacific Ocean. The gateway to the Far East. A place from where one can monitor sea routes to China, Korea, and Japan. And no one thought to take at least one photo? This doesn't add up. Either the photographs were taken but then destroyed, or they were hidden in archives under a secrecy classification, or there was something in those photographs that couldn't be shown to the public. Remember this oddity. We will return to it later. Here's another detail. In the 1870s, a famous photographer named Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky worked in Russia. He traveled across the empire, capturing everything in sight: cities, villages, industrial sites, and people of various nationalities. He created color photographs using a special technology. His archive consists of tens of thousands of images. Vladivostok is not in his collection. Not at all. Not a single photo. Maybe he didn't make it? Too far? But Prokudin-Gorsky captured Siberia. He photographed the Urals. He traveled to Central Asia and the Caucasus. Why not make it to Vladivostok if it's such an important city? Or was he not allowed? Was it prohibited? Did they say, "This city cannot be filmed"? Strangeness is multiplying. For now, let's travel back 200 years and take a look at the map. Open the geographical atlases of the mid-19th century. Look for the maps that were printed in Europe before the Russians officially arrived in Primoria. Find the coastline where Vladivostok stands now. The bay there is not called the Gulf of Peter the Great. It is designated by a different name: Victoria. Read this word one more time. Victoria. Not a Chinese name, not Manchu, not Korean, European, British to be precise. If these lands belonged to the Manchus, if Chinese or local tribes lived here, if the territory was a remote edge of Asian civilization, where did the European name come from? The standard explanation goes like this. European cartographers gave their names to unknown places simply for the sake of convenience in marking them on the map. All right, but then why not just Eastern Bay or Pacific? Why a specific name? Victoria. The name of the British Queen who ascended to the throne in 1837. How did the name of the British Queen make its way onto the map of a bay on the other side of the world decades before Europeans officially arrived there? The British did not navigate these waters until the Opium Wars. Officially. The Russians arrived in 1860. This means the name appeared sometime between 1837 and 1860. Who gave it? Who swam in these waters and named geographical features with European names? If you think that cartographers were simply mistaken, confused names, or indulged in fanciful designs in their spare time, think again. Cartographers do not fantasize, especially in the 19th century, when maps are tools for navigation, trade, and military planning. An error on a map could cost sailors their lives or lead to a diplomatic scandal. If it's written Victoria on the map, it means that someone named this bay. And this someone had enough authority for the name to be included in European atlases. The British East India Company? Perhaps. They had ships in the Pacific. They traded with China in opium and silk. But the official routes of their ships did not pass through Primordia. Too far north, too dangerous. Why venture into cold waters when there are southern ports, Canton, Macau, and later Hong Kong? Unless they had secret bases, places to wait out storms, repair ships, hide from pirates, or from Chinese patrols. Maybe they aren't even British at all. Perhaps the name Victoria appeared before Queen Victoria, and this name had a different meaning. Not the personal name of the ruler, but something else? Victoria in Latin means victory. Could it be that the bay was named in honor of some military victory won here? By whom? Over whom? Unanswered questions. But the fact remains: a European name on the Asian shore. Then why was the bay where Vladivostok is located called Port May before the name change? Port May. Again, a European name. And it's not just a name, but a term. Port indicates the function of the place. This is not a natural bay. This is a port. A place where ships dock, where there are piers, warehouses, where trade takes place. And one more detail. May. It's an English word meaning May, the 5th month. Or is it a surname? Whose? Someone organized a port here. Someone built the port infrastructure. Someone engaged in trade and named this place with a European term. And then he disappeared, or was erased from history. And another detail worth noting: the Manchu Qing dynasty, which ruled China since the 17th century, strictly prohibited Chinese people from settling in the ancestral lands of the Manchus. This included all the territory of modern Primorsky Krai. These were forbidden zones, empty, guarded, and closed to colonization. Why is there such a prohibition? The official version states that the Manchus wanted to preserve their ethnic identity and prevent assimilation with the numerous Chinese. But maybe the reason was different. Perhaps these lands were forbidden not because the Manchus lived there, but because someone else resided there? Someone with whom the Manchu Empire preferred not to engage? And after that someone disappeared, as a result of a catastrophe, war, or epidemic, the lands remained empty. And did the Manchus maintain the ban on settlement to avoid stirring interest in what had been there before? The version is bold, but it explains the strange combination of facts. European names, deserted yet forbidden lands, the sudden appearance of the Russians at the very moment when these lands become no man's land. On the Asian side, the region was virtually uninhabited. No large settlements, no ports, no trade. Where are Victoria and Port May from then? Someone else lived here. Someone who spoke European languages, built ports, and gave names to places. And then they vanished, or were displaced, or destroyed. And the traces were swept away so thoroughly that there is not a word about it in textbooks. Now, something important. Descend underground. Literally. In the heart of modern Vladivostok, there exists an underground network. tunnels, corridors, chambers with brick vaults, an extensive system of underground passages, about which there is not a single mention in the official documents of the city's foundation. It is unknown who built them. It is unknown when exactly. It is unknown for what purpose. This information has been classified for over 100 years. Access to the tunnels is restricted. When they were uncovered during construction work, the area was immediately cordoned off. Witnesses were removed. Documents were placed under a confidentiality seal. Why is there such a panic over ordinary underground utilities? Look at the timeline of official history. 1860. The establishment of a military outpost. 28 soldiers, several officers, wooden barracks. 1868. The port counts about 100 buildings. Thus, the population may total 300 to 500 people. 1881. The first private stone house is built. Now ask the question, where did the tunnels under the center of this young city come from? To build underground communications of such scale, years of work are required. Hundreds, or better yet, thousands of workers are needed to dig, reinforce the vaults, and transport multi-ton masses of soil to the surface. Equipment is necessary: winches, carts, picks, shovels, and fastening materials. Bricks are needed for facing the walls and ceilings. Engineers are required to calculate where to lay the tunnel so that it doesn't collapse. How did they do it back then? Imagine the process. You are digging a mine downwards. Every meter means cubic meters of earth that need to be brought up. Without mechanized equipment, this is hellish work. One worker in a shift can carry, let's say, 2 to 3 cubic meters of soil to the surface. If the tunnel is at least 100 meters long, 2 meters wide, and 2.5 meters high, that amounts to 400 cubic meters of earth. One worker will need over 100 shifts, which means almost half a year of work without days off. But that's not all. The soil needs to be not just dug up. It needs to be disposed of somewhere, removed from the construction site. If you have 100 buildings in the city and 300 people in the population, where will you find the available hands for such a volume of work? And most importantly, why? What are underground tunnels for a wooden military outpost? Officially, this is explained by the fortifications from the Russo-Japanese War. Okay, the Russo-Japanese War took place from 1904 to 1905. But the tunnels are located in the very center of the city, where, according to the official version, there was a wooden post made up of several barracks in the 60s of the 19th century. Military fortifications are built on the outskirts, on strategic heights, at the approaches to the city, not in the center, underneath residential areas. And one more detail. In the reports of those who excavated these tunnels, the quality of the masonry is mentioned, an old brickwork. The technology differs from that of the late 19th century. The joints are filled with a lime mortar of a special composition that is no longer used today. Who built the stone dungeons beneath the wooden settlement? The only logical explanation: the tunnels were built earlier, long before the official founding of the city. This is infrastructure from an older settlement that existed in this place before the arrival of the Russian military. The entrances are filled with soil, just like the ground floors of many old buildings throughout the city. But that's not what we're talking about right now. Now, climb up the hill. Look around. Open the photo archive. Find photographs of Vladivostok from the late 19th century, the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s. Look at the background, at the mountains surrounding the city. What do you see? Bare slopes, absolutely bare. No trees, no bushes, no grass. Empty, scorched earth, like a lunar landscape. And now open a contemporary photograph from the same viewpoint. Dense forest. Green hills covered with coniferous and deciduous trees. Cedars, pines, oaks, birches. The coastal taiga in all its glory. In 130 to 150 years, did the trees grow from absolute zero? From completely bare land to a dense forest? Let's think about the climate. The Primorsky Krai is an area of humid monsoon climate. Summers are warm and humid. Winters are cold but not Arctic. There is plenty of precipitation. The soil is fertile. This is neither tundra nor desert. Forests here represent the natural state of the landscape. Trees grow quickly. If a plot of land is left unattended, in 5 to 10 years it will become overgrown with young saplings. In 20 years, there will be a young forest. In 50, a full-fledged taiga. If there were a natural ecosystem on the hills that has existed for thousands of years, there couldn't be absolute emptiness. Even if you cut down all the trees, new ones would start to grow in a couple of years. Stumps sprout shoots. Seeds are carried by the wind. The land becomes overgrown. But in the photographs from the 80s, nothing. As if a fire had swept through these mountains, burned everything down to the stone. I also initially thought they cut down the trees for building ships and houses, or to ensure military visibility, to see possible invasions from the sea. All right, let's calculate. 1860. The population of the military outpost is 28 soldiers and several officers. In total, about 35 people. 1868. There are about 100 buildings in the port. If we assume 5 people per building, which is a lot for that time, the maximum population comes to 500 people. How many trees can such a group of people cut down in 8 years? One person with an axe can fell, let's say, 5 medium-sized trees in a day. If half the population is engaged in logging, which is impossible, as someone must build, someone must guard, and someone must prepare food, then 50 people will cut down 250 trees in a day. Over a year, that would be roughly 90,000 trees, assuming they work every day without weekends or holidays. In 8 years, 720,000 trees. That's a lot. But look at the photos. Bare mountains stretch for tens of square kilometers. This is not just a plot of land. It's a total clearing of a vast area. In 1 square kilometer of forest, there are, on average, between 5 and 10,000 trees, depending on density. If there are at least 10 square kilometers of bare hills, and in the photographs it seems there are more, that's a minimum of 50,000 trees. Most likely, it's 100,000, or even more. 720,000 to 100,000 seems to add up, right? No, because it's just cutting. And then what? Where did the trunks go? If the forest was cut down for construction, where are the timber storage facilities, Where are the descriptions in the documents of the vast reserves of logs? Where are the signs of sawmills that should have processed such a quantity of wood? The archives mention that the first brick house was built in 1881. This means that most of the buildings were wooden. 100 wooden structures would be, conditionally, about 50 logs per house. That's 5,000 logs. Even if we add fences, sheds, and docks, the maximum would be 10,000 trunks. And the other 90,000? Where did they go? If the clearing was for observation, to create visibility zones around a post, why cut down tens of square kilometers? It's enough to clear a sector in the needed direction, towards the sea or inland. But why strip all the hills around? And the main thing, where are the stumps? When you cut down a forest, stumps remain. They stand for decades. Removing them is an even harder task than the cutting itself. But in the photographs, the ground is bare, smooth, as if there were never any trees there at all. Or they were destroyed not by cutting. Fire. A massive forest fire could explain such a scene. The flames burn everything: trees, bushes, grass, even the top layer of soil. After a severe fire, the ground indeed becomes dead for years. But if there was a fire of that magnitude, it would be a disaster. This would have been reported in the newspapers, in the reports. You can't hide something like that. There are no records of major forest fires in the Vladivostok area during the 1960s and 1970s. So either there was a fire, but it wasn't recorded, which is strange, or the trees were destroyed by something else. And now recall that very drawing of the foundation of Vladivostok. The artist depicted lush vegetation, green shores, trees along the coastline, a picturesque landscape. But in real photographs taken just 20 years later, it's a wasteland. Was the artist fantasizing? Or was he painting what he saw in earlier images that are not shown to us? A picture of the landscape as it was before the catastrophe. Something has destroyed the forests of Primordia. Something powerful and swift. So powerful that the biosphere couldn't recover in 2 decades. And it wasn't until the end of the 19th century, when the first photographs were taken, that young sprouts began to appear on the hills. Remember this. We will gather all the pieces of the puzzle later. And now let's move from the dead forests to the museums, to the artifacts. In the museum collections of Vladivostok and the Primorsky Krai, there are findings that are officially referred to as products of primitive humans. Stone tools, arrowheads, scrapers, knives, ornaments. Look at them. Not in a display case, but up close. If possible, take a look at the high-resolution photographs. What do you see? Perfectly round holes in solid stone. The diameter of the hole is consistent throughout. No widening, no narrowing, no chipping. Polished surfaces shine as if they were processed on a grinding machine. Symmetrical shapes. The left side of the piece mirrors the right. The edges are angled equally with precision down to the millimeter. We are told, all of this was done by primitive man, with the help of a stick, a copper tube, and sand. Let's verify this version through craftsmanship. You want to drill a hole in a piece of granite. You have a copper tube and sand. What should you do? First, you need the copper tube itself. Where can you get it? Copper doesn't just lie around in the form of ready-made tubes. Copper is an ore. You need to find a deposit, mine the ore, build a furnace that will heat up to the melting point of copper over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Melt the metal, purify it from impurities, and cast the tube of the required diameter. This is no longer a primitive level. This is metallurgy. This is knowledge of chemistry, physics, and materials processing technologies. All right, let's say you have a tube. Now, drill. You take the tube, pour abrasive, sand or powder from harder stone, between it and the rock, and rotate the tube while pressing it against the surface. Copper is softer than granite. It will wear down faster than the stone. The abrasive can theoretically carve a groove, but very slowly. Very slowly. Try it yourself. Take a copper coin and attempt to scratch a granite tile with it. How much time will it take you to scratch at least 1 millimeter deep? Now imagine that you need to drill a through hole with a depth of 3 to 5 centimeters. These are days of work, or maybe weeks, for a single hole. Historians often say, "So what? Primitive people had time. They weren't in a hurry." Okay, so where are the traces of this production? Where are the metallurgical waste products? The slag that remains after the smelting of copper does not disappear. Archaeologists should find it near stone processing sites. Where are the defective products? When you are mastering a technology, the first attempts are always unsuccessful. The hole goes off crooked. The stone cracks. The shape turns out to be skewed. These failed blanks are discarded right there on the work site. Where are they? At archaeological sites, only finished, perfect products are found. It's as if they were produced in a factory with quality control and brought to the site in ready-made form. And now, the most interesting part. Some of these artifacts were found near the remnants of stone columns. Columns. Can you imagine? In Primoria, in the Far East, in lands where tribes of hunters, fishermen, and gatherers lived officially, who knew nothing of writing and lived in primitive dwellings. Columns are not yurts. They are not earthen huts. Columns are an element of high-level architecture. These are stone temples, palaces, public buildings, theaters, forums. To create a column, a multi-ton stone block must be extracted. It needs to be delivered to the construction site. Then it must be shaped into a cylindrical form, featuring flutes, if applicable, and the surface must be polished. It should be installed vertically and connected with other architectural elements. This is a level of civilization that masters engineering, mathematics, and labor organization. Who built the columned buildings in Primoria? And when? And why are these columns scattered, broken, and buried in dirt, as if they were deliberately destroyed? And now listen carefully, because what follows is information that official science prefers to ignore. Heinrich Kosten, underwater archaeologist, 17-time champion of the Soviet Union in underwater sports, coach of the Olympic team, friend of Jacques-Yves Cousteau, the legendary French ocean explorer, a person you can trust, a professional with a world-renowned reputation. He made a statement that undermines the entire official narrative of Vladivostok's history. Vladivostok was a major Slavic port in the 12th century. Not in 1860, but in the 12th century, 700 years earlier. According to Kosten, up to 300 ships wintered in the Golden Horn Bay. This was a base for trade between the Russian principalities and the East. Here, Novgorod merchants stopped to transport furs, amber, and weapons in exchange for silk, spices, and jewelry. And among these merchants was Sadko, not a legendary hero, not a fairy tale character with a lute, a real historical figure. A merchant named Sotko Sitinic, mentioned in the Novgorod Chronicle under the year 1067 as the builder of the church of Boris and Gleb in Novgorod's Detinets. If Sadko traded with the East, if he was so wealthy that he could build stone temples, it means his trade routes were established, stable, profitable. In the 12th century, trade routes are not just a solitary journey of an adventurer. They form a system. It's a route tested over the years. It's a network of ports where one can stop, repair a ship, wait out bad weather, and replenish supplies. Where are these ports on the route from Novgorod to the Far East? The overland route through Siberia in the 12th century was incredibly difficult. Taiga, swamps, mountains, lack of roads, hostile tribes, winter cold, when temperatures dropped to -40 and below, summer gnats and mosquitoes that could drive one to madness. The trading caravan, transporting furs, amber, and metal goods, must move quickly. The cargo must be delivered before it spoils, before the food supplies run out, before the muddy season or frost sets in. Thousands of kilometers through rough terrain. This means months of travel, massive losses, the risk of attack, the impossibility of turning back if something goes wrong. It's unprofitable. But there is another way, the sea route. From Novgorod, one can head to the Volkhov, then to Lake Ladoga, and through the system of rivers to the White Sea. Along the northern coast, past Arkhangelsk, rounding the Kola Peninsula, through the Barents and Kara Seas, to the mouth of the Ob River. One can travel up the Ob River to the Irtysh. By pulling, dragging ships or goods into the basin of rivers flowing eastward. By the Yenisei or Lena, to the shores of the Arctic Ocean. And further along the coast, through the Bering Strait, if it was indeed a strait at that time and not an isthmus, or further south, to Kamchatka, the Kurils, or Primorye. It's long. Yes, dangerous, certainly, but it's possible. And if such a route existed, it would be much faster and safer than dragging loaded carts through the Siberian taiga. There were supposed to be support points along this maritime route. Ports, places where ships could dock for repairs, where the crew could rest, where fresh water and food supplies could be replenished. Vladivostok, with its sheltered bay, convenient anchorages, and access to drinking water from mountain streams, could have been one of those ports. Perhaps even the main port on the eastern segment of the route. Kostin speaks of 300 ships wintering in the bay. 300 ships are not fishing boats. This is a serious fleet. Perhaps commercial, perhaps military. This is infrastructure. Docks for repairs, warehouses for goods, barracks for crews, forges, workshops, administrative buildings. This is a city, a full-fledged port city. And he disappeared, without a trace, as if he had never existed. But Kostin claims that he has evidence. He found a section of stone masonry in the area of the former Lend-Lease warehouses on the shore of the Golden Horn Bay. The masonry is hidden beneath a layer of soil and later constructions, but it can be seen if one knows where to dig. The masonry technique is neither Chinese nor Manchurian. The stones are fitted together with such precision that not even a thin blade can be inserted between them. This is a technique of dry stone masonry without mortar. But it is not polygonal like in Peru or Egypt. It is a different technique. Russian, pre-Mongolian. Such masonry was used in the construction of fortresses and temples in Novgorod, Pskov, and Ladoga during the 11th to 13th centuries. The dating was conducted using the method of thermoluminescence. This is a physical method that measures the energy accumulated in the crystal lattice of the stone. When the stone is worked on, cut, polished, heated, the crystal lattice is reset. Then, over time, it again accumulates energy from the natural background radiation. By the level of accumulated energy, it is possible to determine how much time has passed since the last treatment. The result? The 12th to 13th century. This is 600 to 700 years before the official founding of Vladivostok. Why isn't this information in history textbooks? Why are Costin's discoveries classified? Why are his works not published in academic journals? Maybe it's because they destroy the entire concept of the development of the Far East. Because they show that the Russians did not come to empty lands, but returned to their territories lost as a result of a disaster or war? If Vladivostok was a Slavic port in the 12th century, then the entire history of the region has been written incorrectly. Thus, Primordia was not a wild frontier where nomadic tribes lived without literacy and statehood. So there was an advanced civilization here, with ports, with shipbuilding, with trade connections extending from the Baltic to the Sea of Japan, with stone architecture, with metallurgy, with a management system capable of coordinating actions across such vast distances. And then this civilization disappeared, or they destroyed her. And the traces were covered so thoroughly that 700 years later, new owners arrived at the ruins and declared these lands uninhabited and wild. And now, testimony from underground. During construction work in the center of Vladivostok, workers stumbled upon stone sarcophagi. Not coffins, not wooden boxes, stone sarcophagi. The area was immediately cordoned off. Access has been closed off. Military or police, witness accounts vary, have set up a cordon. Local residents who gathered to see the find have been prohibited from approaching. Workers have been sent home. The construction has been frozen. Then people in plain clothes arrived. They conducted an excavation of the sarcophagi. They removed the contents. They filled in the pit. Construction was resumed. There are no official reports of the finding, but the information leaked out. Workers talked. Local residents who managed to see something before the cordon shared it with their neighbors. Warriors lay in the sarcophagi, in armor. Next to the bodies, weapons, expensive jewelry, pieces made of gold and silver. If Vladivostok was officially founded in 1860 and the first stone building was constructed in 1881, where do the medieval burials in the city center come from? The creation of a stone sarcophagus is not just about carving a hole in the ground. You need a stone block, granite or sandstone, weight from half a ton to several tons, depending on the size. You need to transport this block to the burial site. In the 19th century, this was done with horse-drawn power, several horses, a wagon, roads. You need stonemasons who will hollow out the interior, create a lid, and polish the surface. It's expensive. It's labor-intensive. It's done only for high-status individuals. A small military outpost with a population of a few hundred people did not have such resources. Sarcophagi were earlier, before the fast. These are burials of an earlier population. Okay, let's assume these are Manchurian or Chinese graves. Then explain the latitudes. Plate armor is a European type of armor. It consists of plates that cover the torso, shoulders, arms, and occasionally the legs. This is a distinctive element of medieval European warfare. The Manchus used different types of armor. Lamellar armor, made of small plates connected by straps, or chainmail, or thick padded gowns. The Chinese are similar. Their traditional armor is not like European plate armor. Armor is Europe. It is knights. It is warriors. Who buried European warriors in stone sarcophagi in the Far East? And why with such rich gifts, gold, silver, weapons? These are not ordinary soldiers. They are the nobility, the elite. To know of the fallen civilization that once ruled these lands. The area was cordoned off for a reason. The find needed to be hidden. Because it does not fit any official narrative. It indicates that there was a European culture here long before the Russians arrived in the 19th century. And this culture perished. It was destroyed. And the traces of its existence have been wiped away. Now about the fortress. Vladivostok Fortress, a grand system of fortifications that surrounded the city and its adjacent areas. It was officially constructed from 1889 to 1918. Nearly 30 years of continuous building. Fortresses, batteries, redoubts, underground casemates, armored towers, kilometers of trenches and anti-infantry ditches. But in the archival documents about the construction of the fortress, there are strange phrases. Reconstruction of existing fortifications. Use of existing stone masonry. Reconstruction of fortification structures. Stop. What existing fortifications? If the city was founded in 1860 and construction of the fortress began in 1889, where do the fortifications that need to be rebuilt come from in 1889? In 29 years, has a small garrison managed to build full-fledged stone fortifications? Let's calculate what is needed for the construction of the fortress. Engineers, people who will calculate where to place forts, at what angle to position the bastions, and how to construct underground tunnels so they do not collapse. Workers, thousands of stonemasons, diggers, carpenters. A fortress is not just one fort. It is a system of dozens of fortifications scattered over a vast area. Materials: millions of bricks, thousands of tons of cement and lime, metal beams for ceilings, armor plates for the protection of artillery positions. Logistics: roads for material delivery, warehouses, housing for workers, food for all construction participants. Time: it takes several years to build one fort. If you have 20 forts, that's decades of work. And all of this in a region where, in the 60s, there were around 100 buildings and several hundred residents? Impossible. The most obvious explanation is that the fortress was already standing, at least its foundation. The old fortifications, built long before the arrival of the Russians. Historians say these were temporary field fortifications, earthen mounds, wooden palisades. Okay, but then why do the reports mention the stone masonry that was dismantled and reused? The wooden palisades do not have stone masonry. Earthen mounds are too. If there is brick or stone masonry, it means that these were full-fledged stone structures, fortifications built according to all the rules of military engineering. Who built them? And when? Open the maps of the 18th century. Not the modern ones, but those that were printed in Europe before the division of the world among the great powers. British atlases, French encyclopedias, German geographic references. On these maps, where Primoria and all of Siberia are located, from the Urals to the Pacific Ocean, a vast state is marked: Great Tartary, or in other variations, Grand Tartaria, Tartaria Magna, Great Tartaria. This is not a geographical term for unknown lands. This is the name of a country, a state, with borders, with cities marked by dots on a map, with rivers, mountains, and lakes within its territory. Look at the scale. On maps from the 18th century, Tartary occupies a monstrous area, from the Caspian Sea in the west to the Sea of Japan in the east, from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the borders of Persia, India, and China in the south. This is bigger than the Roman Empire at its peak. It's greater than the empire of Alexander the Great. It's more than any other state in the history of humanity. Her cities are marked on the maps. Not just one or two, but dozens. The names are written in Latin script or Gothic font, many of them resembling nothing like modern toponyms. And then, in the mid-19th century, this name disappears. Abruptly, all at once on every map. As if someone had given the order, no more printing. Erase. Forget. Other names begin to emerge instead of Tartary. The Russian Empire fills the western and central parts of the former Tartary. The Qing Empire of China occupies the south. Independent khanates and emirates are the remaining pieces. But where had the cities of Tartary gone? Where has its population disappeared? Where has the infrastructure gone? Those very roads, bridges, and fortresses that should have existed in a state of such size. If the eastern border of Tartary passed through Primoria, the fortress of Vladivostok could very well have been a border outpost of that empire. Border with whom? With China? Perhaps. But in the 18th century, China was weakened by internal turmoil and did not pose a serious threat. With Japan? Highly unlikely. Japan was an isolated country at that time, and the Sakoku policy prohibited Japanese citizens from leaving the islands and foreigners from entering the country. With maritime powers like Britain and the Netherlands? Perhaps. It was in the 18th century that European fleets began to actively explore the Pacific Ocean. Conflicts over control of trade routes were inevitable. And after the fall of Tartaria, as a result of war, catastrophe, or internal crisis, the new rulers simply took over the fortifications, adapted them to their needs, and claimed them as their own construction. This explains the reconstruction of existing fortifications. It accounts for the stonework that does not fit into the timeline of official history. It clarifies why the construction of the fortress took so little time. It was not built from scratch, but adapted. Tartaria has fallen. It has been erased from maps. Its cities have been destroyed or renamed. Its population either perished or was assimilated. And its fortresses, ports, roads, everything that survived the catastrophe has been repurposed. And most importantly, history has been rewritten. A new version of the past has been created, in which Tartaria never existed, in which Siberia and the Far East were wild, uninhabited lands, where brave pioneers came with axes and built civilization from scratch. A beautiful story, heroic, patriotic, and false, because the stones say otherwise. Now let's bring all the facts together. Drawings instead of photographs conceal the true story of the city's founding. Because in photographs, one would see what does not fit the legend of an empty place. European toponymy, Victoria, Port May, traces of previous inhabitants. Someone who spoke European languages lived here and named the places. The tunnels beneath the center are part of the infrastructure of the old city. Underground utilities that cannot exist in a young settlement made up of 100 wooden houses. The destroyed forests are a clearing of the land. Something scorched the biosphere so intensely that trees couldn't grow back for 20 years. High-tech artifacts are stone products with perfect holes and polish. Not a primitive level. An advanced civilization with metallurgy and precision tools. Ancient columns are elements of high-level stone architecture. Temples or palaces destroyed and buried under earth. Slavic stone masonry of the 12th century. Findings from Kostin. Evidence of Slavic presence in the Far East, 700 years earlier than the official date. Sarcophagi of armored warriors. European nobility buried with lavish gifts. The elite of a fallen civilization. The reconstructed fortress is a capture of existing fortifications. The defenses that stood long before the arrival of the Russians in the 19th century. One fact is just a coincidence. 2 facts, a coincidence. 9 facts that point in one direction constitute a system. The system of concealing the truth. Vladivostok. Master the East. Think about the meaning of this title. If the Russians had come to empty, desolate lands, they would have named the city differently. Novorossiysk, New Russia. Petropavlovsk, in honor of the patron saints. Alexandrovsk, in honor of the emperor. Names that reflect a foundation, a beginning, the creation of something new from a blank slate. But Vladivostok is not a foundation. Master is in the imperative mood. It is a command, a directive. Master what belongs to someone else. Seize it, dominate it, reassign it. This is a name for conquest, not for foundation. The scheme is simple. A catastrophe in the mid-19th century, perhaps an earthquake, maybe a volcanic eruption somewhere in the Pacific that triggered a tsunami and mud flows. It could be something else, we don't know for sure. This catastrophe destroyed the biosphere. Forests were either burned down or swept away by mud flows. Cities were buried under layers of soil. The ground floors of buildings ended up underground. The population either perished or fled. Survivors, or new colonists, who arrived several years later, found ruins. A port, a fortress, tunnels, buildings with their ground floors filled in. 1860 is not the date of establishment. It is the date of official capture and renaming. Then the cleanup of evidence began. The tunnels were classified. There could have been inscriptions, symbols, artifacts that pointed to previous owners. The sarcophagi were hidden. It can't be shown that European nobility was buried here long before the official arrival of the Russians. Kostin's findings are not published. The Slavic masonry from the 12th century undermines the entire concept of the colonization of the Far East. Instead of photographs, drawings. Beautiful images that contain nothing that could raise uncomfortable questions. Instead of a real history, a legend. A legend about how brave Russian sailors came to the wild shores and founded a city in an empty place. But the truth is in the stone, in tunnels that cannot be built in 10 years by 100 people, in the sarcophagi that cannot be made without a developed stone processing industry, in artifacts with perfect holes which cannot be drilled with a stick and sand, in a fortress that cannot be built in 30 years without thousands of workers and millions of bricks, in European names on Asian shores, And if Vladivostok, a city at the very edge of the empire, hides such a history, what do the cities closer to the center conceal? If the eastern edge of Tartary was so developed, ports, fortresses, trade routes, stone architecture, what was the capital like? And the main question, who benefited from erasing this civilization from the map of the world? Who rewrote history? Who replaced real events with beautiful illustrations and legends? Vladivostok is not a young city on the outskirts. This is an ancient outpost on the shores of the Pacific Ocean, a fragment of the empire that we know as Great Tartary, an empire that was erased, rewritten, and paved over with the asphalt of a new history. Think. Compare the facts. Ask questions. Don't trust the textbooks written by the victors. Stones do not lie. Tunnels do not disappear. Sarcophagi do not dissolve into thin air. Truth breaks through the layers of lies, slowly but inevitably. And when you next see a drawing of the foundation of a city instead of a photograph, ask yourself, what are they hiding? When you see a European name on an Asian map, consider who gave that name and why it is kept silent. When you're told that the old tunnels are military fortifications from the 20th century, ask, where did the old brickwork come from? When you are shown an artifact from prehistoric humans with a perfect hole, try to drill such a hole yourself using a stick and sand. When you hear about the poor nomads living in yurts, ask, where did the stone columns come from then? History is not what actually happened. History is what the victors chose to tell the defeated. Vladivostok is no exception. It's the rule. The city, which was supposedly founded in 1860, actually existed long before that date. It was a port, a fortress, a trading hub, part of a vast empire that stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific Ocean. Then a disaster occurred. Perhaps it was natural. Perhaps it was man-made. Perhaps it was military. We do not know for sure. The forests have burned. The cities have been buried under soil. The population either perished or fled. And then the new owners arrived. They found the ruins. They occupied them. They renamed them. And they declared themselves the founders. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a logical conclusion drawn from facts. Drawings instead of photographs. European toponymy. Tunnels of unknown origin. Destroyed biosphere. High-tech artifacts. Slavic masonry from the 12th century. Sarcophagi of armored warriors. Reconstructed fortress. Disappeared from maps, Tartary. 9 independent facts, all point in the same direction. Vladivostok is a fragment of a lost civilization, and we live on its ruins, unaware of it. But now you know, and you won't be able to unsee what you've seen, because stones don't lie. Tunnels do not disappear. Sarcophagi do not dissolve in the air. Truth breaks through the layers of lies, slowly but inexorably. And the more people start asking uncomfortable questions, the harder it will be to uphold a beautiful legend. Vladivostok is not the end of the investigation. It is the beginning. Because if one city on the edge of the empire hides such secrets, what do the cities in the center conceal? Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, Novosibirsk. How many more tunnels are still classified? How many more artifacts are sitting in museum storage labeled prehistoric period, when in fact they are evidence of an advanced civilization? How many more sarcophagi with armored warriors are buried under the concrete of new constructions? Think, explore, compare. Don't take textbooks at their word. Check the facts. Look for primary sources. And remember, he who controls the past controls the future. But the past is not just what is written in books. The past is the stones beneath your feet, the tunnels beneath the cities, the artifacts in museums, the names on the maps. And this past tells us the truth, if we are ready to listen. The bay on which Vladivostok stands is today called the Gulf of Peter the Great. However, it has not always been known by that name. Open maps from the mid-19th century, maps published before the official arrival of the Russians, on them, this bay is marked with a completely different name. Victoria. Not a Chinese name, not a Manchu name, a European one, a British one to be precise. If these lands belonged to the Manchus, if Chinese lived here, if the territory was a desolate fringe of Asian civilization, where did the name Victoria come from? Who gave the bay the name of the British Queen who ascended to the throne in 1837? Check the dating of the maps. The name Victoria appears on European atlases in the 1840s, before the arrival of the Russians, before the official start of British exploration of the Pacific north of Japan. But then, why Victoria? Not just a beautiful word, but the specific name of a particular ruler. And how did this name end up on the map of the bay decades before the first European ship officially dropped anchor in these waters? The Manchu Qing dynasty prohibited the Chinese from settling in the ancestral lands of the Manchus. These lands included the territory of modern Primoria. This meant that the region was virtually uninhabited from the Asian side. The British did not come here. Officially, they had no interests in this area until the Opium Wars. The Russians arrived in 1860. Where is Victoria from? Here's another detail. The bay where Vladivostok is located was called Port May before its renaming. Once again, a European name. Port is not an Asian term. It indicates that there was port infrastructure here, an infrastructure familiar to Europeans. Someone lived in this port. Someone built docks, warehouses, navigation signals. Someone traded here and gave the places European names. And then they disappeared. Or they were erased. Now go underground. In the center of Vladivostok, there are tunnels, a sprawling network of underground passages that are not mentioned at all in the official documents of the city's founding. It is unknown who built them. It is unknown when. It is unknown why. Take a look at the timeline. The city was founded in 1860. In 1868, according to the archives, there were about 100 buildings in the port. The first stone house was built in 1881. Where did the tunnels under the city center come from? Building underground communications requires years of work. It needs thousands of laborers to dig, reinforce the vaults, and remove the soil. Equipment is necessary, even if primitive. Winches, carts, tools. Logistics are essential. In a settlement with barely 100 houses, such resources simply do not exist. So, the tunnels existed before the post, before the official establishment. Now many will write, These are military tunnels, fortifications from the Russo-Japanese War. The Russo-Japanese War took place from 1904 to 1905. However, the tunnels are located in the very center of the city, where in the 1860s there officially stood a wooden military outpost consisting of 24 barracks. Who built the stone cellars in the wooden settlement? And why were these tunnels classified? Why has their existence been hidden from the public for over 100 years? What did they see when they uncovered these passages? Perhaps brickwork that, according to official reports, shouldn't have existed in the city yet, or inscriptions in a language that they weren't supposed to know here. The entrances to the tunnels are buried, as, by the way, are the first floors of many buildings throughout the city. But more on that later. Now climb the hill and take a look around. Open any photograph of Vladivostok from the late 19th century, the 1870s, 1880s, or 1890s. What do you see in the background? Bare mountains. Absolutely bare. No trees, no bushes. Empty, scorched earth. Now open a modern photograph from the same viewpoint. A dense forest. Green hills adorned with coniferous and deciduous trees. The coastal taiga in all its splendor. In 130 years, have the trees grown from scratch? Primorsky Krai is an area of humid monsoon climate. It is not a desert here. There is plenty of moisture. The soil is fertile. The forest grows quickly and thickly. If there were a natural ecosystem here, the mountains could not be completely bare. How can this be explained? Officially, it is explained this way. The trees were cut down for the needs of the fleet and city construction, or they were uprooted for military necessity, to ensure visibility from the fortifications. Okay, let's calculate. In 1860, the population of the military outpost was 28 soldiers and a few officers. By 1868, there were about 100 buildings, suggesting a population of perhaps 300 to 500 people. How many trees can be felled by such a number of people over several years? Hundreds of trunks. Maybe even a couple of thousand if they really push themselves. But in the photographs, we see emptiness spanning tens of square kilometers. This is not just a cleared plot of land. It is a total cleansing of the biosphere. Hundreds of thousands of trees have vanished. Who did this? And most importantly, why? If this was a clearing for construction, where are the logs? Where are the traces of logging? Where are the stumps that should have remained on the slopes for many years to come? They are gone. The ground is bare, as if fire has swept across it. And now remember that very drawing of the foundation of Vladivostok. In it, the artist depicted lush vegetation, green shores, and trees. But in real photographs from the 80s, it shows a scorched wasteland. The artist painted a fantasy. Or what was there before the catastrophe? Something destroyed the forests of Primordia in the mid-19th century. Something so powerful that the trees could not recover in 20 years. It was only by the end of the century that young seedlings began to grow. Let's move on to the artifacts. In the museums of Vladivostok and the Primorsky Krai, there are exhibits officially referred to as primitive artifacts. Stone tools discovered in the region, arrowheads, scrapers, knives. Look at them closely. Perfectly flat holes in solid stone. Polished surfaces. Symmetrical shapes. Edges crafted with millimeter precision. We are told this was done by primitive man with the help of a stick, sand, and patience. Try to drill a hole in a piece of granite with a copper tube in sand. Time yourself. If you have the patience to work for an hour without achieving any result, you will understand the absurdity of this explanation. To make a copper tube, one must go through the entire production cycle of metallurgy. Find copper ore, build a furnace, smelt the metal, manufacture a tube of the desired diameter from it, and then, using this tube and an abrasive, drill a hole in a stone that is harder than copper. This is not a primitive level. It is advanced metallurgy and an understanding of mechanics. Historians often say, "It can be done with primitive methods, just very slowly." Then the question is, where are the traces of this production? Where is the slag from copper smelting? Where are the defective products that are inevitable in mastering the technology? Where are the blanks? Where are the intermediate stages of processing stone? At archaeological sites, only finished, perfect products are found. It's as if they were manufactured by machines rather than crafted manually with a flint hammer. What's most interesting is that some of these artifacts were found alongside fragments of stone columns. Columns in Primorye, in the Far East, in the lands where nomadic tribes of hunters and fishermen officially resided. Columns are an attribute of high-level architecture. They are not yurts or earth dwellings. They are temples, palaces, public buildings. Who built them here, and when? Now listen carefully. Henrik Kosten, an underwater archaeologist, 17-time champion of the USSR in underwater sports, and a friend of Jacques-Yves Cousteau, made a statement that official science prefers to ignore. In the Golden Horn Bay, a Slavic naval outpost existed as early as the 12th century. According to him, up to 300 ships wintered here. Trade was conducted between Novgorod and the east. The Novgorod merchant Sadko stopped here. Sadko, not a fairy tale character, a real historical figure mentioned in the Novgorod Chronicle under the year 1167 as the builder of the church of Boris and Gleb. If Sadko traded as far as the Far East, where did his ships dock? On a deserted shore without port infrastructure? A trading route requires a system. Docks where repairs can be made and storms can be weathered. Warehouses for goods. Fresh water. The ability to stock up on provisions. None of this can be built in a single season. So, the port existed, a long time ago, constantly. Kosten claims he has found evidence. A section of stone masonry in the area of the former Lend-Lease warehouses. According to him, this is the oldest masonry in the city. The technology is pre-Mongol Russian. Dating through thermoluminescence indicates the 12th to 13th century. Why is this information not in textbooks? Why are Kosten's findings classified? What is wrong with the version stating that the Slavs came to the Far East not in 1860, but 700 years earlier? Maybe it's because this version undermines the entire narrative of the colonization of Siberia and the Far East? Because it shows that the Russians did not come to uninhabited lands, but were returning to their own lost territories? And now, confirmation from the underground. While construction in the center of Vladivostok, workers stumbled upon stone sarcophagi. The area was immediately cordoned off. Access was restricted. Local residents who tried to see what had been found were forbidden to approach. Information leaked from the construction site. Warriors lay in the sarcophagi, in armor. Nearby were rich decorations made of gold and silver. If the city was founded in 1860 and the first stone building was constructed in 1881, where do the medieval burials in stone coffins in the city center come from? The creation of a stone sarcophagus is not a simple task. A stone quarry is needed. The transportation of a multi-ton block is required. A stone coffin weighs between 1 and 3 tons, depending on its size. To transport such weight from the quarry to the burial site, a road, carts, and draft animals are necessary. Skilled stonecutters are needed, capable of shaping the stone, carving out the inner cavity, and making the lid. A small military post of 28 soldiers did not have such resources. The sarcophagi were there before the fast. They are traces of an earlier population. Standard version: burials of the local nobility, perhaps of Manchu aristocrats or Chinese merchants. But the warriors were in armor. Plate armor is a European type of armor. It consists of plates that cover the torso and limbs. The Manchurians and Chinese used different forms of protection: lamellar armor made of small plates or chainmail. Plate armor is a hallmark of European warfare. Who buried European warriors with gold and silver in the Far East? It wasn't poor settlers. It was the elite, the nobility of a fallen civilization. The area was cordoned off for a reason. This discovery needed to be kept hidden, because it does not fit into the established history. Now about the fortress. The Vladivostok Fortress was officially built from 1889 to 1918. 30 years of construction. A grand project of fortifications at the approaches to the city. But in the construction documents, there are strange mentions. They talk about the reconstruction and utilization of existing fortifications. If the city was founded in 1860, where do the existing fortifications come from by 1889? In 29 years, it is impossible to build a fully fledged stone fortress with the efforts of a small garrison. It takes decades of work by thousands of craftsmen. It involves millions of bricks. It requires roads for transporting materials. It necessitates engineering calculations and plans. But the main thing is the technology for producing the bricks themselves. In the 1860s, there were no brick factories in Primorye. The first bricks for Vladivostok were brought by ships from China. This is documented in the records of the construction of the naval hospital. So where did the millions of bricks for the fortress come from, if there was no local production and maritime delivery would yield at most a few thousand per year? At first glance, it seems logical. These were temporary earthworks, embankments. However, the reports mention brickwork that had to be dismantled and reused. Earthen embankments do not have brickwork. These were stone structures. Fortifications that someone built long before the arrival of Russian military engineers. Whose defense was this fortress protecting? From whom were the builders of these walls defending themselves? Open 18th century maps. There, at the location of Primorye, is marked the eastern border of Great Tartary, a vast state that extended from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. And then, in the mid-19th century, this state disappeared from the maps. Abruptly, all at once, as if it had been wiped away. Could it be that the fortress of Vladivostok defended the eastern borders of that empire? And after its fall, the new rulers simply repurposed the fortifications, passing them off as their own construction? Let's gather the facts. Drawings instead of photographs mask the reality of the city's foundation. European toponymy: Victoria, Port May, traces of previous owners. Tunnels beneath the city center are infrastructure that should not exist in a young city. Destroyed forests are a clearance of territory after a catastrophe or war. High-tech artifacts and ancient columns are signs of an advanced civilization. Slavic stone masonry of the 12th century was present long before the official foundation. Sarcophagi of warriors in armor. European elite buried here with honors. The rebuilt fortress is a takeover of existing fortifications. One fact is a coincidence. 2 facts are a coincidence. But 9 facts pointing in one direction are already a system. The system of concealment. Vladivostok. Own the East. A strange name for an empty place where no one lives. Own is a command. It is an order to seize what belongs to someone. If the Russians had come to uninhabited lands, they would have named the city differently. Novorossiysk, Petropavlovsk, Alexandrovsk. Something that reflects foundation rather than conquest. But no. Own the East. A direct indication of seizure. Vladivostok was not established in 1860. It was conquered and reassigned. The scheme is simple. The mid-19th century disaster devastated the biosphere, burying cities under layers of soil. Survivors, or new colonists, discovered the ruins on the Pacific coast. A port, fortifications, infrastructure. 1860 is not the basis. It is the official date of the capture and renaming. Then the cleanup of traces began. The tunnels are classified. The sarcophagi are hidden. Costin's findings are not published. Instead of photographs, there are drawings. Instead of the real story, there is a beautiful legend about the conquest of the wild land. And if Vladivostok on the eastern edge hides such a history, what did the cities closer to the center conceal? If the edge of Tartaria was so developed, ports, fortresses, trade routes, what was the capital like? And the main question, who benefited from erasing this civilization from maps and from people's memories? Vladivostok is not a young city on the outskirts. It is an ancient outpost on the Pacific Ocean, a remnant of an empire we know as Greater Tartaria. An empire that has been erased, rewritten, and paved over with the asphalt of new history. Think. Compare. Do not trust textbooks written by the victors. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss new investigations. There are still many mysteries and discoveries ahead. We will continue to search for clues, ask uncomfortable questions, and explore what official science tends to overlook. Because the truth is always close by. You just have to want to see it.